For Windows Azure subscriptions that have a high number of virtual machines, at that point it probably makes more sense to set those virtual machines up in a virtual network. So we're going to have a bit of a look here at understanding all of the processes and the configurations involved with implementing a virtual network. For starters, the virtual machines, in essence, reside on the virtual network. It's no different than a network that you might set up in your on-premises environment, wherein you simply say that these systems are on that particular network. Same goes for Windows Azure. A virtual IP address is assigned to each virtual machine on that network. Now, there are some restrictions and considerations with respect to the IP configuration, and we'll go through those shortly. But what you can do within any virtual network is to set up your own private address range. So whichever range you like to use is perfectly fine. So it gives you more control. You absolutely can set up your own DNS servers for name resolution. You can set up VPN connections for your on-premise clients to be able to access the resources within the virtual network. And you can also set up endpoints, which you might not have both VPN connections and endpoints. Maybe you might go with one or the other, but endpoints expose just a particular service to the internet as opposed to all of the servers in there, but you can have both. So with respect to the IP configuration, as mentioned, there are some restrictions and considerations. For starters, all of the virtual machines within an Azure virtual network are assigned a DHCP address that has a very long lease duration. So in essence, even though they are dynamically assigned, from all practical perspectives, it does have the same address for a very long time, possibly for its entire lifespan. The address is assigned and maintained as long as the virtual machine is allocated. So even if you shut it down, it will still come back up with the same address when you start it up again. It's not until it's deallocated entirely that the lease is actually let go. That being said, there is no static configuration available. So even though you do get sort of a practical implementation of a static address, at present, there is no option for you to statically assign the IP address of your virtual machines. So along with that, neither can you provision your own DHCP servers within the virtual network. They all receive their addresses from the Azure DHCP server. That may change at some point. Also, just one other thing to note is that when you do set up your virtual network, usually the first few addresses of any given subnet are reserved primarily for VPN access. So addresses like you see there, 10.0.0.1, 2, and 3, typically these are reserved for the gateway and possibly just even a gateway subnet. So if you create, for example, your first virtual machine within a virtual network, good chance that you would see it come in as 10.0.0.4. So let's just quickly compare this with independent or individual virtual machines. Within Azure, of course, you can create a virtual machine and it's going to get a particular IP address. And again, you do not have control over that. So you might fire one up and you might discover it received 192.168.0.5. Perfectly fine, but you don't have any option to change that. Now, this is a bit of an extreme example, but just to illustrate the point, you might then decide to fire up a second virtual machine, and it might actually get a completely different IP address. Now, you can set things like affinity groups that will probably get it close, but just the point being that you do not have control over the IP addresses that are assigned to virtual machines. So, with a virtual network, we get more control. What we can do now is simply to define the virtual network, and you do have the option as to which network address configuration you're going to want to use. So you can assign, in this case, you see 192.168.0, and you can assign the entire space, /24, / really whatever you feel in terms of what's appropriate for the size. But from that point, once the virtual network is created, then you can create your VMs and assign them to that network. So they will then all get addresses within that network, and you're guaranteed that they all can see each other. So certainly that gives you much more control. If you do require VPN access, that can be set up. So we can have the exact same virtual network configuration that we just created. We have our on-premise network, and in essence, you just create a standard VPN connection between the two, and you can either use a hardware-based solution like a site-to-site VPN or a point-to-site, which is just a particular client or a few clients using standard software to connect. Both of those are supported within Azure Virtual Networks. And then finally, the other option is to just go with endpoints, wherein maybe you aren't interested in connecting all of your clients through to the servers, maybe just certain services that you want to expose. So same deal, we see the same network configuration. We have our on-premise network, but maybe we're just more so concerned with management. So what you might do is set up something like RDP, remote desktop, or maybe PowerShell access into a specific server or several servers, that's fine. But that's the idea of endpoints. We're not exposing the entire network, just a few selected services on any one of the hosts. In either case, however you set up your virtual networks, it definitely gives you more control for controlling and managing your virtual machines.